Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this, our 32nd edition in the Band Talk podcast series. Once again, I'm very thankful that you're joining us for another wonderful conversation. And this is one that I know you're going to once again enjoy. Today we have the retired Commander and Director of the United States Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., Colonel Larry H. Lang. And he's going to talk to us about growing up playing trombone in both a garage rock band and the El Paso Symphony Orchestra. And he's going to lead us through a journey that spanned 29 years in the United States Air Force, of which 26 of those he served as commander of one of the Air Force bands. During our conversation, I know you will hear the humility and gratitude Colonel Lang has for all those who had a hand in his growth and development. He realizes the important role music plays in bringing people together, in creating a sense of a common bond. For me, our conversation validates what music teachers should aspire to do. But before we begin today's conversation, let me take a moment to thank all of the folks who helped to bring you this podcast. First, Hal Leonard, the publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band, something that I am extremely proud to co-author. And if you are an Essential Elements user, or if you know one, please visit or have them visit the Essential Elements Interactive blog at eeiblog.com, where you can learn tips and techniques to make essential elements more valuable to you as a teacher and to your students. And while you're there, please also check out our Essential Elements Band Talk podcast with Dr. Tim Lotzenheiser, Paul Lavender, Steve Smith, and yours truly. We talk about ways to help you through this pandemic and also have a guest who shares wonderful insight, ideas about band directing in bands, and all making it work through these difficult times. Thank you to Kevin Lepper's Advantage Network Percussion, where you only get the advantage if you are in the network. Advantage Network brings you a variety of accessories, instruments, supplies, and music, all at great prices. But the best part is that you get personal service. You'll get the best personal service you will ever receive from the man himself, Kevin Lepper. Visit him at AdvantageNetworkInc.com. Thanks to Vandercook College of Music, a great institution where I spent 23 of the greatest years of my life. There is no program that I know of that will prepare you to teach music better. Undergraduates at Vandercook learn to play every instrument, regardless of their instrument major. They play in the band, they sing in the choir, they play in the orchestra, they learn piano, guitar, general music, and they graduate ready to enter the job market and have an immediate impact. And while you're there, check out the great summer master's degree program and the Mecca continuing education program that has an incredible array of online classes. Comprehensive, practical, and affordable. That's Vandercook. Visit Vandercook at vandercook.edu. And finally, to thepodcastingstore.com, where you will find all of the latest and greatest equipment to help you set up your home teaching or learning studio. Or if you're a fellow podcaster, they've got all the right gear to get you started. So special thanks to all these sponsors, and thank you for your support of them and their efforts. I know they are all working hard to do their best for you and for the entire music education community. We'll be right back with our conversation with Colonel Larry Lang in just a minute.
This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning, and a proud sponsor of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Listen to what we've been working on in this clip from our podcast. I had a fairly interesting dilemma revolving around remote learning, specifically kindergarten, for my 5-year-old Timmy. He's taking his remote kindergarten classes on an iPad. The thought was that we could put a pair of headphones on Timmy and isolate him from the distractions in the room, and he could concentrate on learning. The issue with that then is that we can't monitor his lesson while it's going on. So then the idea that I had was to split the signal, but then the problem with that is if we put a pair of headphones on him and me or Jamie, is that then we are tethered to the iPad and can't attend to Sammy. So the solution that I came up with was to go from the lightning port on the iPad. To hear the rest of this podcast, please visit thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning. This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com. Now back to Charlie.
Well, I never had the opportunity to meet our next guest when he was a college student, but I certainly did hear a lot about him, and it was all good. And then several years after he graduated from college, I did have the chance to meet him, and everything they told me about this guy was an understatement. I mean, he was such a class act, and during that time, we have remained in contact, and I have stood from afar as I've watched his meteoric rise in the nation's band world, where he rose to become the conductor and commander of the United States Air Force Band. He's now recently retired, and he is the executive director of the Flagstaff Symphony Orchestra. It's just an honor to welcome retired Colonel Larry Lang to the podcast. Larry, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you, Charlie. So good to see you again.
Well, it's great to see you too. And for our listeners, we're doing this on Zoom so we can see each other, but we only do the recording. And sorry about that. Maybe someday we'll advance this podcast to get really high in the technical world. But until then, you just got to put up with our soundtrack. So, well, Larry, it's been a while since I saw you. I saw you in person. In fact, I guess the last time was when you guest conducted the Vandercook College Music Symphonic Band at the Midwest. We performed the Tarina La Procession de Rocio, and you were just spectacular. And a whole lot has transpired between then and now. And we're going to get into that. But before we do, I think we need to know about Colonel Larry Lang, the guy that grew up in El Paso, Texas. So talk about your earliest memories of music and learning to play an instrument.
You know, in El Paso and in Texas in general, I think most people know that the music education system is very strong. And that was no different in El Paso. And they start students in band like in 5th grade. So they give you a choice. At least I had a choice to either be in band or to take Spanish. And so I took my little tour of the band room and looked at all the instruments and just fell in love with the trombone. I don't know why. I couldn't even reach 7th position when I was in 5th grade. So, but for some reason I was attracted to music very early on. And I just had the greatest teachers. I think you'll hear that theme as we talk today. I'm so grateful that I had good teachers every step of the way, good mentors, good leaders around me who to teach me and to guide me. And so I was really fortunate. I had a great band director in high school, John Bailey. John is still alive, and he came to my final concert with the Air Force Band when I was on tour in Texas. And he got to conduct the Air Force Band under one of his students. And it was just, full circle. It was just so much fun to see him again. But he was just one of so many really great teachers. So I really had a great start. I got off to a good beginning.
So what high school was that in El Paso?
Andrus High School.
Oh, sure. Andrus. That was a great school.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of very fine high school bands in El Paso, still are, I'm sure.
Yes.
And I was, like I said, I was just fortunate. He was he was a very fine, I mean, even my middle school band director was a trombone player, Randy Capshaw, and Randy he rode me hard. I guess he must have seen something in me, and he really drove me hard to practice. He gave me free private lessons. Uh, and I don't think he was doing that with all of his students. I didn't think so anyway. But people took me under their wing early on. So that was very valuable.
El Paso, Texas is one of the places that I was the coldest in my life. I was invited one time to judge. They used to have the Sun Bowl tournament of bands. It was on Thanksgiving weekend, and I was judging that. And this blizzard came in out of nowhere. And in fact, it was so cold that the batteries in our cassette recorders were freezing up. We couldn't get a tape going. I mean, I was just so cold, but it was cool, man. I'm telling you.
It is a fun place. The Sun Bowl is, of course, in the mountains, and that's part of why it gets so cold around that time of year. But in general, El Paso is pretty darn hot.
Yeah, it was so cool. And the coolest part was they didn't pay us for judging the event. They took care of our expenses. And then,
oh, really?
And then our payment was they took us to the Tony Lama boot factory. And we got to pick up a pair of Tony Lama boots, man. That was just one of the coolest memories ever. But I have fond memories of El Paso. So when did you know you wanted to make music a career?
Well, in high school, some friends and I started a rock and roll band. We were playing Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears and Tower of Power. We had a horn band, and it was, no little thing. We had a manager, and we played almost 3 or 4 nights a week in nightclubs all over town. And I was like 15 years old. So and then I was in the El Paso Symphony as a high school student, as a substitute. And so it just kind of was a natural progression. I just loved playing. It's all I ever knew how to do and wanted to do. So it was an easy choice when I was starting to look at colleges. I looked at UTEP, which is there in El Paso, and they have a good program now, especially because Colonel Graham, one of my mentors, Lowell Graham, is there. He was the department chair for a long time. But back in the day, New Mexico State, which was just 45 minutes away, was a little stronger program. And it didn't hurt that they gave me a full scholarship. So I went up the road to New Mexico State to study music.
So you're the first conductor of the Air Force band that was a rocker.
Well, I don't know about that. You'd be surprised. A lot of our, when you're in the Air Force band program, it requires a wide range of skill sets from all kinds of different music. As you may know, there are Air Force rock bands and country bands and jazz bands. And
sure.
Certainly the concert bands are very, very fine. But I've always loved all kinds of music, probably the same for you. I love it all. I enjoyed being in the rock band one day and then, going over to the symphony and playing, Beethoven. I just loved it all. So it's always the way I've been, and it suited me very nicely when I became a commander in the Air Force.
That's great. So you went to New Mexico State, and of course, when our mutual friend Tim Lotzenheiser accepted the director of bands position, I was supposed to be his graduate assistant, but I took a bottom of the 9th inning turn, and this job had come up in Kansas City, and I had stopped by the University of Missouri where Tim had taught, and the director of bands there told me about this job, and he said, "Have you ever interviewed for a job?" And I said, "No, I don't plan on it." And he said, "Well, you need to." And one thing led to another. I accepted this job and never made it I did make it to New Mexico long enough to pick up the boxes I had shipped down, and then jumped in the car and drove back to Kansas City.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long 2 days. But during that time, Tim and I did stay connected as we do today. And he kept telling me about Larry Lang. So what do you remember from your days with Tim at New Mexico State?
It changed everything for me. I think anyone who knows Tim is that he lights a fire under you. And of course, if he's your band director, he's there every day. A lot of people get the chance to experience him in a clinic or in a session or something at Midwest or maybe he'll come to your high school and teach your kids for a day or two. But when you have him every single day for 4 years, it changes your life. And it's interesting though, Tim was a different person back then. And you know that because you knew him back then. He still had all the same passion and energy and fire in his belly, but he was a lot tougher. He was really tough. I think it was because he grew up in that Ravelli era where band directors modeled Ravelli and others like him, and they were just kind of extraordinarily demanding. I didn't mind that because my band director in high school, John Bailey, was the same way. I think that was the way band directors thought they needed to be back then. Less motivational, more in your face, a different kind of motivation. But he still produced the same results and had a great band, and it grew and grew and grew. The marching band especially got so big, and it was a lot of fun. I remember Tim more than once coming right up to my face. I mean, nose to nose, and just yelling in my face for like 3 minutes. And that was not uncommon. And I think it was the people he thought the most of, or maybe thought had the most promise, he spent the most time in their face. So I got quite a bit of it. I remember being late to a marching band rehearsal. I'd slept in on a Saturday morning. The rehearsal was at 7 a.m. And I came running in around 7:05. And Tim looked down at the field. He stopped the rehearsal and he told me to go back to my dorm room and that I was out of the show and to come see him in his office later that day. But it wasn't maybe 20 minutes later that one of his assistants called me and said, "Larry, you got to get back over here. Tim forgot that you're the soloist in the show tonight."
Oh, that's great. That is priceless.
So I was playing the solo to Malagueña, and I was the only one who could play it at the time. So he kind of had to forgive me and let me play that night after all. But we had a great relationship, and Tim and I became very close as you have over the years. And I love him dearly. He's probably the most important mentor I've ever had.
And he loves you too, by the way. I told him I was going to be talking to you for the podcast, and he said to make sure I gave you his best. He just holds you in such high regard. But you're right. Tim was tough and he was demanding, but he was fair. And one of his favorite stories that he tells on me was I was this fat freshman in the Northern Michigan University marching band, and I had the ability to play really loud. I mean, I could play loud trumpet, right? And he was running around in his shorts with his bullhorn, and he comes right up, like you said, right up to my face with this bullhorn. And he goes, "Can't you play any louder?" Being obviously very facetious, right? And he said that I said, "Yes, sir, if you'll let me stop marking time, I think I can."
That's awesome. That's
Oh,
so
boy.
funny.
So, go ahead.
One of the things that people may not realize about Tim is that he's a very fine musician. And you learn that when he's your band director. You don't always see that, of course, when he's your motivational speaker. But man, he's a world-class drummer, percussionist, and conductor. And I learned so much from him musically as well.
You're right. So what made you want to be the drum major of the marching band?
I was the drum major in high school. John Bailey asked me to do it. I think he saw some potential in me. I loved it. I was attracted to that leadership role. I was the president of the high school band. And then, in college, I was the principal trombonist in the wind ensemble and the jazz ensemble and the marching band. So those leadership roles kind of came naturally to me. I was lucky. I was drawn to it. I had some aptitude for it, and I loved it. I loved being in front of that great band, and I've enjoyed that my whole career.
Yeah, they were way ahead of their time. That band was way ahead of its time. I mean, they were hot. Yeah, it was really cool. So you mentioned you played in the El Paso Symphony both in high school and while you're in college. As you look back, what things did you take away from that experience?
Well, again, the broad range of musical opportunity was what I enjoyed the most. I liked being able, I felt like I was a studio player almost, just whatever you put in front of me, I wanted to be able to play it really well. That's always been my goal, and that's what I've kind of demanded from a lot of my organizations that I've led. So that kind of attitude as a musician, where whatever you put in front of me, I want to know how to play it. I want to have experience doing that kind of thing. So I was looking for those experiences, and I enjoyed the musicians who could do it all. I was also in the faculty brass quintet. They needed an extra trombone player, so I can't remember why the faculty trombonist couldn't do it at the time, but I was in the faculty quintet at New Mexico State, and we did a number of recordings. So I got to do some studio recording as well. So I love that broad experience. It was so much fun.
So after New Mexico State, where was the next stop?
Well, I wanted to get my master's degree. And frankly, I wanted to explore something different and get to a different part of the country. So I looked for opportunities where I knew I could really, learn something and be active and not just be a student. So I looked for a TA position where I could really be part of the faculty, where I could be a part of a team. And so I went to the University of New Hampshire because Stan Hedinger was there at the time. And Stan was an absolute genius when it came to wind ensemble literature and conducting. He was well known and respected in the New England area, especially. And I wanted to study with Stan, but Stan put me in charge of, and I mean literally in charge of, the marching band. There was no marching band director. Stan didn't like doing the marching band, and he wanted a TA, teaching assistant that could do it all. So he just gave it to me. I just took the course. I had the marching band to myself as a graduate student, and it was in pretty bad shape. There were only about 50 kids in it, rundown uniforms, rundown instruments. It was a mess, and which was perfect, right? Because I had nowhere to go but up. And within just a year, it was 125 members and new uniforms and a lot of excitement. And it was so much fun. I was lucky enough and did a decent enough job that they actually hired me onto the faculty there when I finished my degree. And there was a little stint there where I spent about 6 months with Tim when he went to Marching Bands of America, which is back in the day, that's what they used to be called, right?
Right.
So I spent some time, I took a little time off from my master's degree and went to work with Tim for about 6 months and went all over the country teaching drum majoring skills and setting up clinics. And it was a lot of fun. And then I went back and they hired me onto the faculty at the University of New Hampshire.
And from there, you head to McNeese State in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You were there for what, 6 years? I'll bet you're glad you're not there right now, as Hurricane Delta.
I feel so bad. Yeah, you're right. They've had such a tough year in terms of the hurricanes. They built a brand new band facility and music building that was torn down at the last hurricane. They lost everything. So I do feel bad for them. I loved that gig. It was a lot of fun. I was there with David Waybright. David's a good friend. He's down in Florida now. And again, we came into a situation that was struggling, which is kind of a theme in my career. I tended to go places where the band was struggling, even in my Air Force career. And actually, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed turning things around and bringing people together and building a good team and doing something positive, trying to make a difference. And that's what David and I were able to do there at McNeese. It was a really good few, 6, 7, almost 7 years there. And I enjoyed it very, very much. It was a good assignment. That part of the country is a lot of fun. The food is good. The climate is terrible. It's hot and muggy and wet, but I enjoyed every minute of it. It was great.
So when did the Air Force enter the picture for you?
Well, as you likely know, if you want to progress in the college arena, you have to have a doctorate. especially these days. And so I was determined to just move on and take that next step. And I went down to Florida State and auditioned for a graduate assistant, a doctoral assistantship, and I was able to get one. And I was, ready to go to my doctorate program down at Florida State. And I also simultaneously took the audition with the Air Force. And I basically won both auditions. So I had a choice to make. Spend three years with my wife supporting me, going through a doctoral program, or go ahead and start a new career in the Air Force. So I took the leap and decided to jump into the Air Force, and that's what I did. I have never looked back. It was just such a great opportunity, and I'm glad I did it.
So when you made that decision, that became a full-time commitment for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're 100% full-time active duty Air Force once you make that. I was the oldest second lieutenant in the band career field. I was probably the oldest person at officer training school when I went to training school. Most of the officers are, they're 20, 21 years old when they go down there. I was 33. I had already had so much experience, but I did fine, and I enjoyed it as much as I could. And then I loved going to my first assignment in Ohio. I was at Dayton, Ohio for a couple of years with Rich Shelton, who was my first commander. Rich was fantastic. He's a good friend still to this day, and he actually lives in Phoenix. So he's real close by, and we've talked and seen each other a couple of times in this last year that I've been here. But yeah, I was very lucky again to be assigned to someone who was a good mentor and a very fine band there in Dayton.
Was that the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base?
It was. Yeah, it sure was. And it was interesting because Rich had not had any experience either commissioning new composers, which I had a little experience with at McNeese, and then he hadn't had any experience recording. And I had a love for those things. I had a real interest in them, and I immediately convinced him that that's something that band should be doing. They hadn't done much of that. So we did some good recordings while I was there. We commissioned several nice pieces of music. It was just a great experience.
And what year was that?
1990. So I started in 1990, and then I was there for, 2.5 years. So 2.5, 3 years. I was there 3 years, I guess. Yeah, 3 years till 93.
So how many different bass bands did you conduct prior to your appointment as commander of the Air Force Band in Washington?
Well, I've been the commander of 5 bands. I was, of course, the deputy commander of the Wright-Patterson band. So 6 total bands. And there's only 10 now. When I started in the Air Force, there were 21 bands. And just over the course of the years and all the budget cuts and just the different things that have happened in our government, the bands kept getting cut and cut and cut, and down to 10 bands total worldwide. So I feel very fortunate to have commanded 5 of them.
So when you were starting and you went in and you became the commander of your first Air Force band, did you ever think someday that you would end up in Washington?
I had no aspiration to do that. I didn't think that was a path for me. I don't know about you, Charlie, but I'm the kind of guy that I go to work. I do my very, very best each and every day. And, wherever that leads me, that's where I go. I'm not that ambitious. I didn't want to be the commander of the Air Force Band. I just wanted to be the best band leader and conductor and teacher and performer I could possibly be. That's all I try to do each and every day. And, I was lucky enough that it led me down the road of success. So no, I had no aspiration, no thought that I would ever make that, or the rank of colonel for that matter.
And you were in Washington, you served there for 7 years? Isn't that a long time to be in that position?
It is. I think, the typical Air Force band assignment is anywhere from 3 to 5 years, which was typical for me as I went from assignment to assignment. Although I had some lucky stints. I was at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia for 8 years. I was at the Academy for 5 years, and I was at the Air Force Band for 7. So those are unusual stints. And again, I just have to say I'm very fortunate, because today the average young officer spends maybe 2 years at his first assignment and then moves on to another deputy assignment, and then probably goes to the Pentagon to do a staff position for 3 or 4 years, and then to another deputy assignment. And then they finally get their first command maybe 10, 12 years into their career. I got my first command 3 years into my career, and I was a commander the rest of the time, for the rest of the 29 years I was in.
29 years.
Yeah, so 26 years I was a commander in the Air Force. And that's extremely unusual. I was very fortunate.
That's amazing. 26 years commander, 29 years in the Air Force. You don't look that old, man. You look good. Hey, and so in 2011, you were promoted to the rank of colonel. And of course, for our listeners, not everybody gets that promotion. I mean, we've had some lieutenant colonels that have conducted the band, but you got the full colonel. So how does one go through the ranks, if you will? Like, is there like performance reviews that take place to get that kind of consideration and appointment? I mean, how does that talk us through that process a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a performance review every year. It's done by your supervisor. You're rated on your leadership skill. It's not as much in the Air Force, at least in the early stages, about musical leadership as it is being a good commander, a good leader, a good officer. And I always wanted to do that anyway. The music kind of came naturally to me, but being the officer, I really wanted to be a good officer. And then there's school requirements. You have to go for professional training or take online, at the time it wasn't online courses, they were correspondence or in-person training back in the day. And I made sure to get all those things done early and get them done, which has been a problem for some of my colleagues over the years. They didn't finish in time, so they weren't considered for the next grade. And it's not easy. The courses are tough sometimes. I took it very seriously and did that. But also it's a matter of not only taking care of the people that are under your command, but also taking care of your boss. If you know what I mean, you got to make sure you understand what their goals are, what the mission of your particular command is at the time. And I served in a lot of different Air Force commands. And so every general officer has kind of a different view of bands. And I worked for so many different general officers over the years. And I really got to know them and what their goals were and made sure the band was supporting their goals. That helped me get promoted, to be frank with you. I mean, and I think it helped them do their job better. So I think it's like you having a superintendent or a supervisor at a school system where if you get along with that person, your band is probably going to benefit from that. And that's the same way it was in the Air Force. Having that general officer understand the mission of the band and how it could help him, I think was always very, very important, and all the way up to my role in Washington. And I had a lot of senior people there that I reported to or had to work for, including the President of the United States. So very critical. So I guess there is a little bit of politics involved, although I didn't try to play any kind of game. I just did what I thought was right. And I was the 9th colonel in the history of the Air Force band program.
So who would have been your immediate boss?
Typically, our band officers work for the public affairs section of whatever base we're on. And then that public affairs officer works for the 3-4-star general at the base. So you're very close. You're one step removed from the leader of that particular command. That's the most common situation. In Washington, it was actually much different. I was much further down in the totem pole, so to speak, than I was at any other assignment I'd ever had. I worked for a colonel who worked for a colonel who worked for a 3-star general who worked for a 4-star general, which was very unusual. Typically, I was a younger officer, major, lieutenant colonel that worked for a colonel that worked for a 4-star general. So I was very close to the top all the way through my career until I got to Washington. And then I was way down the totem pole, which is contradictory to what people might think.
So what things, when you remember your high school band, did you remember that helped you conduct the United States Air Force Band?
I don't know. It's so much of the high school experience, but as I said early on, I had really good teachers. John Bailey was wonderful. Tim was wonderful. I took a lot of conducting workshops as I was going through my career. I studied a lot with Robert Reynolds. I went to 2 or 3 of his sessions. Craig Kirchhoff and Jim Croft. I mean, I took so many courses. I probably took 15 conducting seminars over the course of my career. I could never get enough of it. And I loved learning from so many different people and studying and reading. When I was up as the commander of the band in the Boston area, I spent a lot of time with Frank Battisti. I love that man, and I loved watching him work with his students, and his knowledge of the repertoire was just incredible. And so just learning from all those great teachers and great conductors along the way inspired me every step of the way. And even in Washington, I still kept in touch with all those people. I had Robert Reynolds in to conduct the band, and I had Tim in to conduct the band. I had all sorts of guest conductors all the time, guest composers in and out, learning from them, letting the band experience that opportunity. So, I love that part of it.
Talk about your relationship with Colonel Gabriel.
I had a good relationship with him. He lived in Washington still, and it was important to me to honor his legacy. And I had him over quite often. He conducted the band probably 2 times a year. And of course, he came to Midwest with us. He did a couple of other ABA events with us. So I thought it was important. He was the commander of the band longer than anyone else in its history, and had a storied past of his own, and I wanted to make sure and honor that. So yeah, we kept in touch, and I had him over quite often.
In 50 years, do you still hope to be able to fit into your Air Force uniform like he still does?
Yeah, he's funny. He still wears that even today. I think he's in his mid-90s, and when he goes out, he still wears it. I remember getting, the first time I saw him, I noticed that his medals were all crumpled up, and he didn't have them in the right order. He was missing a couple things. He just hadn't kept up with it since he'd retired. So I made sure and got him some new medals, and made sure he looked sharper even than he already did. He always looked sharp. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So during your time at the Air Force, you created some incredible events that caught national attention. Once I remember surfing through Facebook, and I saw this flash mob performance, and it went absolutely viral. Talk about how that idea came about and how you pulled it off.
Yeah, we did 5 of those in total. At the time, the first one they were kind of the thing. Everybody was doing flash mobs, and people that are listening today may remember there was a sequestration period around that time. It was around, 2013. We were in the middle of sequestration, which essentially meant we didn't have any money. So the band couldn't go on the road. We couldn't record. We couldn't tour. We couldn't, do anything that cost a lot of money. But I still wanted to make sure and get the band out there and get the word out about all the great work that the Air Force was doing and the Air Force Band was doing. So we came up with the idea of a flash mob. So we worked with the Air and Space Museum on the mall there in Washington, and put together a really, what was important to me was to play really, really good music on all of the flash mobs I did. I took a lot of time studying and finding the right combination of music and entertainment to put together. And so we went to the Air and Space Museum. We went in the night before when it was closed and practiced for about 3 hours. That was our only rehearsal. And then the next day we showed up at noon, and we were in the basement, in the parking basement under the museum, and came up the escalators. And then, as you see in the video, we kind of snuck up on people that were there that day and put on the first flash mob. And I think it was a hit because everybody was, it was a little bit, it was a minor version of what we're going through now with this pandemic. We were going through a really bad financial crisis at the time, and people were looking for new entertainment, new things to do. And the band just played their socks off. It was such a fun event, and the music was so special. You can't beat starting with Bach. So I think that was part of it. And then it caught on. We thought maybe we'd get 10,000 views, and that would be good. That would be a good audience for a band. But in the first 24 hours, we had 300,000 views.
Amazing.
And by the end of the month, we had 1 million. And it was just crazy. By the time it was all over, we had like 30 million views just on the first flash mob. We couldn't believe it. It was getting picked up overseas. We had people calling us from radio stations and TV stations all over the world. And I did several interviews, and it was picked up on major news channels. And it was just the craziest thing. It went crazy viral, as they say. And then we did, like I said, 4 others. The 4 others didn't receive quite as much attention, but they were just as good.
So you're conducting the United States Air Force Band. You got some of the finest musicians to be found in the world. What do you think the members of the band expect from their conductor when they step on the podium? And how different do you think that is from being a college band director?
Well, I can tell you that they're very, very serious musicians. They take what they do extremely seriously. They've studied their entire lives. They've worked so hard to get to that position. It was not uncommon to have 100, 150 people auditioning for one position. So you can imagine how professional and competitive they are. And so they want the same from their conductor, right? They want someone that comes in that's ready, that's prepared, that knows what they want, that knows how to communicate, and is a good musician. And so I was very, very careful with my preparation. I spent a lot of time preparing for rehearsals and not wasting any time. I started on time. I was extremely efficient with my time and their time. I respected their time very carefully. I demanded a lot from them. I asked a lot from them. They enjoyed that. They enjoyed being stretched and asked to do more. So in terms of the comparison to college students, sometimes college students are still in the student mode. They're still learning. They're still growing. There's more teaching involved. I didn't have to do really any teaching, of course, at that level with the Air Force Band. So as a college conductor, I did a lot of teaching, a lot of explaining, a lot of research, a lot of history, a lot of context for the pieces we're playing, a lot of musical, pedagogy. So that's the difference, really. I mean, I had some very fine college bands when I was teaching, but nothing to compare to the Air Force Band. They were at such a high level, which was, of course, so much fun, being able to do just about anything you can imagine.
A lot of fun, a lot of great responsibility, and you're still teaching, but you're teaching at such a higher level. So yeah, bravo to you. So during your time as the commandant of the band, did you ever have any personal contact with President Obama or President Trump?
I did. It was always exciting to play for the president. I played, of course, at both of Obama's inaugurations. and played at the White House several times, played at President Trump's inauguration. He loved the bands. Both of them did. Um, President Trump in particular seemed to have a fondness for the bands, not just the Air Force Band, all the bands in Washington. President Obama loved the bands, but he also had a very strong connection to Hollywood, as you know. A lot of our listeners know that. So he had entertainers, commercial entertainers at the White House more often than some other presidents. And then President Trump used the Air Force and the other professional bands there in Washington extensively, especially Mrs. Trump. She loved the Air Force Strings, and President Trump loves the Air Force Rock Band. He'd have them over frequently and still does, I'm sure. Well, actually, it's probably not as much now during the pandemic. But yes, we were over there quite a bit. I also played for President Clinton and both President Bushes, so 5 presidents total during my 29 years. And it was always exciting because you're surrounded, of course, by Secret Service, and you have to go through all sorts of screening. Even though we're in the Air Force already, we had to go through 2-3 hours of waiting and screening before we could be anywhere near the president. But then once we're in, you're just right there. I've been inches away from President Obama and President Trump, just did different ceremonies and stuff. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of excitement.
As you look back at your time with the Air Force, what are you most proud of?
Right now, especially, our country is so divided and so torn apart. And I loved being a part of bringing people together over the years. As we were out on the road and playing from town to town, we played small towns and big towns all over the nation. I did hundreds of concerts all over the United States. And it was always so enjoyable to, no matter what was going on in the world, to see people come together, to be patriotic, to honor our country, to honor our veterans, especially those who've given the ultimate sacrifice, which is always part of our presentation, to honor them. And, just bringing people together, bringing communities together with music. I've always enjoyed the power of music to bring people together. And I saw that overseas as well. When I was deployed to the Middle East, I was in charge of the Air Force bands that were in the Middle East for about 6 months. So, more like 4 months. But we used them to reach out to different communities all over the Middle East. It was so interesting and powerful to see music break down barriers and bring people together. So I guess that's, sure, we played incredible music. I commissioned over 50 composers over my career. I've made over 50 recordings, many of which are on Spotify and on other commercial outlets. So I love doing all that, but when it comes right down to it, connecting with people, building relationships, bringing people together was maybe the most rewarding.
Now you're executive director of the Flagstaff Symphony Orchestra in Flagstaff, Arizona. Your roles and responsibilities have really changed, but I'm sure in some ways they've stayed the same. So what made you go the route of an arts administrator?
Well, I frankly had already done the college thing. I've already conducted the finest band on the planet. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that again. And I wanted to be closer to my children. I'm at an age where I want to be close to my kids and grandkids and be able to get over to see them as often as possible. My daughter lives in LA. My son lives in Colorado Springs. So we're kind of right in the middle between them. And it's a day's drive to see either one of them. So that's been really nice. And then to use the skill sets that I've had as an administrator, as a conductor, as a commander, to help this orchestra, flourish even during this very difficult time, has been rewarding and challenging. In some ways, as challenging, more challenging, in different ways than I've ever had in my life. So I've enjoyed the experience. I enjoy this part of the country. I was born in the Southwest and remember this part of the world very well. It feels comfortable and natural. And like I said, being close to my kids makes a huge difference.
I trust during the pandemic, it's been really a trying time for an orchestra. I mean, we know of orchestras that have had to cancel their seasons. And I mean, we've heard the Metropolitan Opera has canceled through 2021. And I mean, that's just crazy. So what are your plans for the coming season?
Yeah, everything's gone online, of course. We've done a lot of virtual performances. We're doing asking individual musicians from the orchestra to do excerpts from their homes, and we've put those online as part of what we're calling the FSO, Flagstaff Symphony Orchestra Strong series, FSO Strong. And that we've had probably 15 of those, and we've done some online chamber concerts. We're going to do an online Nutcracker performance with an older recording of the Nutcracker that the symphony made 2 years ago. We're looking at how to handle the spring, maybe do a much smaller orchestra and then film that and show it online. Maybe get to the point where we can have a small audience in the auditorium, depending on how this pandemic progresses. But yes, it's extremely challenging because we're not bringing in nearly the income that we would normally bring in through ticket sales and subscriptions. And I guess the fortunate thing, if there is any, is that it's not a union orchestra, it's a contracted orchestra. So that's a blessing and a curse all at once. I mean, I wish we could pay the musicians more money, but as it is, we're going to be okay, I think. We were able to get the PPP money to help pay for some things that we needed and pay the musicians for concerts that were canceled. So that's been a blessing. And thankfully, this orchestra has been here for 71 years. It's an integral part of this community, and the community has stepped up and been donating and helping and keeping things alive.
Are there outdoor venues that the orchestra could play at when the weather is appropriate?
Oh yeah, we have a world-class outdoor amphitheater here in town, and I was actually going to start a summer concert series this year, but all that went out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully by next summer we'll be able to start that, and it's a beautiful arena, outdoor space that holds about 1,200 people. It's going to be lovely to get into that space. And we'll need to, I think, do more outdoor things. Right now, we're associated with the music school at the Northern Arizona University. We use their auditorium, and it's a lovely 1,500-seat auditorium. It's quite nice. But right now, we can't get in there. Arizona has a 50-person limit on any indoor venue.
Wow.
So 50, you can't make that work financially or logistically.
Yeah. Any interest to someday maybe stepping on the podium and conducting the orchestra?
That's this particular role. It's not really appropriate, but I'm spending a fair amount of time, at least I was before the pandemic, guest conducting. I've done several guest conducting engagements. I have 2 already scheduled for 2021 in hopes that they will happen. One in Chicago and one in Hawaii. And I'm always looking for those opportunities to stay on the podium. The conductor here is very fine, and I don't want to interfere with his work. So no, I don't think I'll be conducting this symphony.
Okay, one final question. So we got a presidential election. It's going to be happening, a couple weeks. And you now have been asked to give the president a briefing on why America needs its service bands and to define the important role they play in the country. So what would you tell him?
I think I go back to what I said earlier about, bringing people together. We desperately need that, maybe more than ever, not only in our own country and our own communities. And music really just has that ability, doesn't it? Especially in Washington, I played for the the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all the leaders of each military branch, the president, many congressional leaders. And when you bring music to a high level event like that, it just brings a sense of calm, a sense of unity to those discussions that they might have, later in the evening. It's just so important. Every single general officer I've worked for has gotten that. They understood the power of music to really advance the Air Force mission. And I think we've proven that over and over and over again, not only in the United States, but at the places that we've been deployed all over the world. So music has that really important ability to draw people together, to break down barriers. And you just can't do that with a missile or a gun or any other kind of weapon. It doesn't work. First, you got to get people together to get, talk about peace, talk about cooperation. And so that's what I would tell him. And that's what I've told every boss I've had.
Let's hope they listen.
Yeah, I hope so too. You know how it is. I mean, when things get tough financially or otherwise, sometimes the arts are the first things that get cut. And that's always so unfortunate, because the arts, not just music, but can really make a difference, lift the human spirit, bring people together, make people remember, what it means to be human. So I've had such a great career and opportunity to do that 100,000 times. So I'm so grateful.
And you've done a great job throughout the years, and you continue to, I'm sure, do a great job in Flagstaff. And we appreciate your service to our country and the great gifts you gave us from podiums all across the nation. And Larry, it's just an honor to have you, to see you virtually here and to have you on the podcast. I wish you well. I can't wait to the next time I get a chance to see you in person, give you a big hug and say thank you. So God bless you and your family, buddy. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Same to you, Charlie. Thank you so much. God bless.
Colonel Larry H. Lang. What a story. I hope you heard his humility, his gratitude, his respect. Being most proud of bringing people together. The idea of creating a flash mob that ended up with over 30 million views, of which I have to admit, I had a few of those myself. It's not hard to see why he's been so successful. He is one of those leaders that you want to work for, who you want to do your best for. As my friend Tim Lotzenheiser says, when you have class, it shows, and when you don't, it shouts. Colonel Larry Lang's class, once again, has shone brightly, and we all owe him our thanks for bringing so much joy, happiness, and music to people around the world through his work with the United States Air Force bands. Larry, there's no doubt that you're going to succeed in your new role with the Flagstaff Arizona Symphony Orchestra. So good luck, my friend, and keep bringing people together through your work. We need it now more than ever. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. We'll be back with more great conversations. In the meantime, please tell your friends and colleagues about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And until the next time, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.